I'm live. Hello, Babs. How are you? You just noticed my subscription count. I hope you can hear me okay. Uh, there we go. As usual, my hearing is not optimum, but thanks very much for joining us, Babs, and anybody else out there. How's it going, folks in YouTube land? Yeah, Babs, we don't have a lot of subscribers, do we? Mm, but I think we're doing okay, actually. We've only been going a very short time, to be honest. I think, let me see, last year, I think we started by uploading the first 5 videos around the 3rd of June, I think. So we haven't been going that long, to be honest. And we did that because we figured that the Denis Villeneuve Dune film was coming out in August. And so whenever we started, oh, let's do this with this PhD, these turned them into videos somehow. Um, yeah, well, we knew we wouldn't get them all done in time, but that's how we got started. So we've only been going for, goodness, where are we at now? It's November, I suppose, so about a year and a half. But yeah, it's a one-man show, Babs, unfortunately. So all the work has to be done by myself, and I'm not altogether au fait with engaging with social media and stuff like that, because I've kind of stepped back from a lot of it a long time ago. So I do my best to promote the station, but yeah, we're getting there. I think our subscription count is reasonably respectful for where we're at this point, and but we're hoping to get more subscribers and try a few new things, you know. So I hope you're all keeping well out there wherever you're at today or this evening. My throat, as usual, excuse me, is not the best, but can't be helped. Babs is saying you still haven't seen the movie, but you're not stressed about it. Have you any idea when you're going to get to see it, Babs? It's just one opportunity with family and commitments and jobs and things. But I take it you're looking to see it on the big screen, which I think must be worth it. I think, you know. But yeah, you'll get there, Babs. You'll get there. I've watched it a few times now, and my opinion about it continues to evolve. To be honest with you, I think something that was quite interesting. If you can bear with me a wee second, if I can find it, was that yeah, I was thinking about the TV series and how long it was. And I picked up a new copy of it, but I think I actually scribbled it down on the inside of the cover. But I think it works out about 4.5 hours in length, you know. And I was actually thinking about all the stuff that's not. They managed to get a lot of the story into the TV series, and I was thinking that if Denis Villeneuve's films, the 2 films, end up being probably about 5 hours, then he would have more runtime to tell the story of Dune than the TV series did. And it starts to make me think a wee bit about stuff that gets left out, if you see what I mean, because I thought the TV show covered the book very well. It made choices, if you see what I mean. There you go. Bob says, you do what you do. I get the word out as I can too. More if a dollar issue last few weeks. Oh, well, I can relate to that, Babs, to be honest with you. Whenever we went up to see it in Belfast, as you know, and it was really appalling, it was kind of my treat. But I'll put it this way, the cost of the day, it was about half of what I had in my bank account. So it's one of the reasons why I was a wee bit gutted about my June cinema experience. It wasn't great, you know, but it was cash we could have done with, I suppose. But that's the nature of the world, I suppose, Babs. So I thought I'd have a wee chat tonight, Babs, about and anybody else that's out there, about excuse me, sort of science fiction that influences me. And I thought I'd introduce myself a wee bit better, actually. And I suppose you've got to know me a wee bit, but I haven't really talked too much about myself. So I was going to have a wee chat about science fiction and me, really, and kind of why it's been a big part of my life. There's David Segovia. Hello, Doc. He says, nice to see you again. Hello, David. I was about to kind of sort of read your comment there. Thanks very much for joining us, David. Going to have a wee chat, as I said, about all things science fiction. And I thought I'd introduce myself, as I said, a wee bit better, and chat about the kind of science fiction that I like, and I suppose kind of chat about it in a non too serious way. And as much as I think, Babs, you were just chatting about the subscriptions, I've got a few comments back and forward that we're considered a wee bit highbrow in the video department, and that we're a bit hard to follow, which is a bit sad. But uh, I'm hoping that actually kind of the videos, they're dense. I think that's the problem with them, that it's an awful lot of information. I think, and if you rewatch some of them, they start to make sense a wee bit. I think, but excuse me. I suppose the idea is hopefully to get across my love of science fiction, and I think things like Dune. What's not to like, I suppose. Um, uh, and yeah, just kind of curious to see sort of what science fiction sort of has affected other people and influenced their lives. For example, I know, Babs, you were saying that Dune affected, influenced you about religion, and I was going to say to you, did the same thing for my mother. Hmm. Interestingly enough. But so aye, so anyway, Doc Sloan is the moniker I go by here. I am a doctor, doctor of philosophy, and my name's Russell Sloan. The red Russ, as you can tell in the production cards in the front of the video, is a wee joke, and it's a wee in joke to The Weird of the White Wolf, which is a Michael Moorcock book. And so yeah, that's me. And basically, I'm one of these people that's been involved in kind of a perpetual student for a long time, and then involved, as you sort of end up doing, getting involved in education. So I used to be a university and college lecturer, but I haven't worked in that sector in a long time. So, but I was actually a lecturer prior to getting my PhD. So I used to work as a computing and information systems lecturer, which was a joy. And I went to do my PhD in science fiction because I was getting quite bored with the whole lot of it, I suppose. But I suppose I cut to the chase. A few things, I suppose, about myself that have interested me over the years. Starting very young, I talk about particularly think books like Of Time and Stars, these kind of things by Arthur C. Clarke. Excuse me. Um, which are these wee sort of compendiums of science fiction short stories that you find in a lot of libraries, and I just love them. And in particular, this book is the first. Of Time and Stars is in the UK. I don't know if we've got it abroad, but we had what's called the Puffin. I don't know if you can see that on the side there, the Puffin Book Club, which is kind of a kid's version of the Penguin books, and this is actually Puffin sci-fi. And it's Arthur C. Clarke, and it's a collection of wee short stories. And as I've often said, there's two of my favorite stories in this are the 9 Billion Names of God, but in particular, the one that I love, absolutely love, is a story called An Ape About the House. And I've been reading these kind of wee collections of short stories since I was quite young, but that's the first one that I actually paid for myself as part of a school book club, and I'd saved my money from my paper round. So prior to that, I suppose I would read a lot of comic book science fiction, and it would be British comic book science fiction. So things like 2000 AD and Star Lord. Let me see what else. Well, within British science fiction comics and British comics in general, I suppose there was Eagle for a time, which was kind of a reboot of the old 50s British comic that features Dan Dare. I've got one of these. Just thought I'd show you a couple of these things tonight. And so, as a very young kid, I didn't really sort of get a lot of toys and games at Christmas, but I would get sort of educational things. But I would get annuals, which were absolutely brilliant. And this is a 2080 annual from 1980. There was a matching Judge Dredd annual to go with this. And oddly enough, this comic book absorbed quite a lot of the other comics. So you'll find, for example, there's Dan Dare appearing in 2080, and he's quite a different sort of Dan Dare. Don't know if you know this comic book character. He's quite good. And I suppose in terms of being interested in science fiction, they'd be full of things. There you go. Look at this. Welcome to the world of video. The latest thing, and there'd be wee sort of articles and stuff in these annuals with all about things like H.G. Wells, Arthur C. Clarke, and the sort of science and technology of the future. This one's got one of my all-time favorite stories in it, by the way. It's one of the great strengths of 2000 AD is it would often take really famous kind of literature. In this case, it's taken Flowers for Algernon and done its own kind of quite dark twist on it. This one here is a story called Benny's Tale, which is about as you can see, sort of tired of being stupid. It's it's a very similar thing to a Flowers for Algernon. Benny Bean, I think his name is, and it ends quite badly for him. Um, so just in terms of chatting about a few things like that, 2000 AD was great, But the local libraries, and I suppose I kind of got a bit of a jolt about this today. Local libraries were always very good for me because I ordered a few books there recently to fill in my gap of Michael Moorcock Stormbringer or the Elric Saga books. So I was able to get this one for a couple of pounds. Can't get the first one for love nor money. Well, for an awful lot of money. So I ended up buying this compendium here, I suppose, which is the Tale of the Eternal Champion, Volume 8. But I was just after the first story in it. So we've got all my Elric stories back. And so Michael Moorcock stories, those kind of things that would come out of particularly sort of the New Worlds magazine era and those kind of compendiums, as well as the ones from America, would be a lot of the stuff that I read. Excuse me. And 2000 AD is quite peculiar because as a comic book, it grew up with its readership. When I started reading it when I was 4, and it had stories that would appeal to a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, but even but also to adults, oddly enough. And as I grew up, by the time I was in my 20s, the stories are pretty adult. I think it's an interesting phenomenon. 2000 AD, so yeah. So basically, as a kid in Northern Ireland, there's not a lot of science fiction about, and it's what you get in certain bookshops, a couple of turnstiles kind of things in your local library, and then your sort of secondhand bookshops. So I used to go and trade a lot of. As a kid, would read some books and take them back up, and there's a secondhand bookshop in Smithfield in Belfast. And I would every month I would be up there for all sorts of reasons, and basically would trade in my old books for new ones. That sort of, which is quite sad actually in some ways, because I've got quite fond memories of a lot of these old books that came from that era that I gave up for. And I occasionally see them in secondhand bookshops and buy them. Things like sort of a who would it be? Was it things like The Road to the Rim? Is that A. Bertram Chandler? Things like that. Babs is saying my intro to science fiction came through Star Trek and prog rock. Yeah. Well, same for me, I suppose, Babs. The main TV influence would have been the original series, Star Trek. It was very much, we would get an episode of that once a week, tea time, I think, on a Thursday, around 6 o'clock. And, I remember being a very young kid and being totally in love with the original Star Trek and thinking it was amazing. And I suppose if you talk about, I suppose the idea of tonight, by the way, guys, fire away with your comments and questions. I'd love to hear, as Bab says, what is it that got you into science fiction and so on, the one episode that really got me thinking about the original Star Trek as a kid was the one where Spock has to mind meld with this creature that's in a mining colony, and it's kind of like a molten blob of lava. And I suppose it's a bit similar to it's one of the many attempts of Star Trek to do a modern, up to date version of Beowulf. But that was the Star Trek episode that really made me go, wow, this is interesting. David Segovia is saying, hello again, David. In my case, my intro to science fiction began with some stuff of Jack Vance and Arthur C. Clarke. I've read very little Jack Vance, I have to say. And I think I have somewhere, excuse me, is he the guy that does the books of the dying sun? Is that Jack Vance? I'm trying to think. Because I think I've got lots of books that I have yet to get round to reading yet, David. And I'm wondering, is that I've got a big compendium, but I think it's other writers writing in the same universe. I might be getting them mixed up with someone. The other book that I picked up, by the way, is just I was about to start doing some work on the Culture series, And I started reading the Culture series in my, I suppose, about when I was about 19 or 20. The only one that I seem to have lost happens to be the first one, Consider Flaybass. And I was kind of a wee bit gutted about getting this version of it because of the slightly older covered versions, I suppose. What would they be called? The Orbit. Um, these kind of covers here, way back when, shows you how old it is. It's totally faded. That's use of weapons. You stuck. Oh, Babs is saying help. She's stuck in buffering hell. Dear, oh dear. You seem to have that problem before, Babs. Is that an Ohio thing, Babs? I'm wondering. Sean McAllister saying that's Gene Wolfe. What's the book of the? That's the book of the new sun, isn't it? It's a dying earth. Songs of the dying earth. Is that what I'm thinking on, Sean? Hello, Sean. Is Vance the earth abides? That might be what I'm thinking about. It's not here actually, but oddly enough, must have. But the earth abides. Earth abides. That's that's Joe. What's his name? Earth abides is sitting here somewhere. Is it George Stewart or something like that? I'll tell you what. I'll find that out for you right now. Hang on. My memory for names is actually quite bad, folks. Earth abides. Honestly. There we go. Written enough about it. There we go. Yeah, Earth Abides is George R. Stewart. Let me see. I'll tell you what, actually, here where I'm at. I'll tell you what the book I was thinking on was. Yes, it's the guys. The book that I have downstairs is called "Songs of the Dying Earth." I haven't read it yet, but it's stories in honor of Jack Vance. There we go, David. It's a collection of short stories and shorter essays composed in appreciation of the science fiction and fantasy author Jack Vance, especially his Dying Earth series. That's the ones I was thinking on. So that's kind of on my to-do list, if you know what I mean, which is getting bigger and bigger all the time. Because I do like attacking science fiction and reading it, and I have to say, guys, I've been reading it for a long time. I've been reading it since the 70s, and I suppose it's a bit like the classical, where there's that much of it. I'd argue that if I was reading science fiction every day, I wouldn't get through anywhere near, I don't know, a small percentage of it. But I suppose those kind of writers on those turnstiles would be the big four. So that's, and I suppose the only one that I really wasn't introduced to, in terms of novels, would have been Frank Herbert. I didn't read a Frank Herbert novel until I was in my 20s, but I'd read Asimov, Heinlein, and Clarke, and quite a lot of Michael Moorcock. Lots of his different Eternal Champion stories, and compendiums and compendiums of wee science fiction stories. Excuse me. As we talked a wee bit, Babs, before about Alan Dean Foster, I would have read lots of science fiction movie tie-in books. So at that time I would have read. He did Alien and Aliens, for example, and quite interested in Star Wars when I was a kid. I suppose the cinematic event as a kid for me. I was born in 1973, so I was 4 years of age when I went to see Star Wars, and I went to see it in the Strand Cinema in Belfast, which was a great cinema. I think it's still there, to be honest with you. But as a kid, and particularly in a very dangerous time in Belfast, I went to see almost every great film I ever saw as a kid in that cinema, and they used to do double bills. Absolutely brilliant. So this the whole Star Wars phenomenon, you know. I don't know if you know, guys, but I got to meet Darth Vader as a very little kid, and but he wasn't dressed as Darth Vader. So what's his name? Is it Dave Prose, isn't it? That played the physical Darth Vader. Over in the United Kingdom, he did a road safety campaign, for kids, and he was actually the Green Cross Code man, and he went around all these schools. So he came to my school, And we got to meet him, and I got a wee Green Cross Code badge, and we all knew he was Darth Vader. He was like, he was. We were so. He was big. You have to remember. I think I must have met him when I was about 5 or 6, maybe. And so he's quite impressive to a little kid. I also met the evil giant squirrel Tufty, which was the other kids campaign thing at the time, the Tufty Club, I think it was called, and he came to our school and terrified everybody. He's a giant squirrel, and yeah, back in the day, I suppose giant squirrel outfits weren't that great, but there you go. So yeah, and I guess I would have read. I read a lot of Philip K. Dick as at a very young age, and absolutely loved particularly his short stories. And his short stories kind of led me to the novels, and then it was once we saw things like Blade Runner hitting the cinema, and then later Total Recall. It was great to see Philip K. Dick and on the big screen. Um, hmm. So I suppose whenever that was my main sort of thing. I would read 2000 AD every week to get my daily dose of Judge Dredd, I suppose, and sort of just would build up lots of different writers. Would get into things like Dan Simmons. Was reading his, I think, first book of his, I think, was Carrying Comfort that I read. Excuse me. And I suppose again that would have been the early 90s, and I think or maybe late 80s. I think stuff like Carrying Comfort. He was writing horror books at the time, and oddly enough, I think a lot of his books were kind of they're named for there's literary nods, I suppose. So Carrying Comfort was a poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins, and I was studying him in the school at the time, and I thought, oh, here's a book about vampires. Oh, that sounds interesting, Hmm. It was a phase that didn't last very long. I have to say, I'm not very into the sort of horror genre, or certainly not the modern horror genre. Um, but yeah, Gene Wolfe's the where are we? Arg. Gene Wolfe's the Book of the New Sun. I'm trying not to bring things down from this shelf way up here because we tend to send things flying. There we go. That's the Gene. And there's more to these actually. I've read these not too long ago. I don't know how long ago. Maybe about 10 years, I think. And I understand that there's more to them. Let me just see. So the Book of the New Sun. There's 4 books there. But yeah, I think there's the Earth of the New Sun, and then Night Side of the Long Sun, Lake of the Long Sun, Chaldea of the Long Sun, Exodus. It's one of these things that go on, which often disappoints me. But as for I think the Earth of the New Sun is meant to be kind of a coda to this. But these books are brilliant. I'm looking forward to tearing through them again because there's a lot of language at play in them, and I quite like that in science fiction. It's one of the things that attracted me to Dune, I suppose. So, if by the way, guys, if you have any comments or questions about science, anything at all, fire away. I just thought a nice open science fiction and me, science fiction and you, and I'd love to hear about any particular book, comic, anything that's science fiction that really sort of gets you going, really, if you know what I mean. I'll sort of talk about individual books in a wee minute or two. I basically let me see, didn't get into university, and then kind of tried hard the next year. I managed to get myself into a degree studying classical studies. I suppose trying to get into it the first time was nearly impossible, so I found my way in, and oh, I'll let you know about that right now, Babs. Yeah. By the way, Doc, how's that great Greek myth vid coming along? I caught your teaser of D and M, saying now I'm busting for curiosity. Goodness. Well, it should have been ready, Babs. And the simple fact is, I like to be thorough, and it's gotten enormous. So the thing is written and recorded now. So you'll have it next week. But it's got a lot more work to be done on it. To be honest with you, I was hoping to have it all done. I've been working at it every night this week, and it's just I'll put it this way: a 10 to 20 minute, a 10-minute video can take me usually a better part of a week to get done comfortably. This one's sitting over an hour at the minute, and I'm going to try and cut some stuff out of it. But I've kind of It's become something quite big, and I've got to sort of oh, don't be worrying about it, Babs. I apologize for being a pest. Babs says I'm psyched for it. I'm really looking forward to it. It's a big interest of mine, Babs, and to try and what I'm not too sure how to present it. It's all done, and I'm just looking at editing the work a bit better. But essentially, what I've done is I have a complete I take you on a complete genealogical work through the entire. Let's rephrase that. I take you through a complete mythological work through of the genealogy of the Pelopid line. Um, oh goodness! Now I thought that wasn't too difficult a thing to do, but it's not that easy. It's done, by the way. It's written and it's recorded audio, but it's going to need. I've got to hunt down a lot of pictures, and it's quite brutal stuff, to be honest with you, Babs, as my wife keeps pointing out. Um, VT saying hello, everyone. Hi, VT. But yeah, it's on its way, and I know I've kept saying I hoped it would be. I'm not going to be doing that anymore. You'll have it for next week, definitely, and I'm looking forward to it. But it's a big set of myths, and to be honest with you, I could be writing an episode on these guys for a year. So I'm really trying to get the absolute gist of it. And because the myths are like Dune, first of all, there's the whole body of myths within it. There's a plan within a plan within a plan. There's recurring motifs, um, familial vengeance, vendettas, and prophecy, prescience, cannibalism, and cookery. So there's so much to it, and it really does cover an awful lot. And the tough thing is that actually it extends into other myths with other lines as well. But it's done, and I've done a read through, and it's making sense. So but it's incredibly dense, and I don't have a bother with the Greek names, but simply put, there's a lot of variants of the myths, and I've tried to cover some of them, the major ones. And at the minute, the way it's going to go is I'm going to kind of introduce it, say that basically that this is the main dominant set of myths that overlay the Atreides family plus a lot of the action in the Dune series. And it may not be obvious because Herbert doesn't just blatantly transpose them, and he has aspects of different myths on different characters. So there's different members of this family, for example, are overlaid on Paul. Different members of this family are overlaid on his father. And then there's even different gods that are overlaid within characters. It's to do with their actions and so on. So I'm hoping to So it's really just, here's this set of myths. If you don't know about them, I suppose they used to be quite well known. But it's the Atreidae would be the main family that are involved, one of the dominant families involved in the Trojan War. But we're not going to cover too much of that. We're actually looking at their family and the particular myths that travel down through time. They're really interesting if you're into your mythography, and the study of mythology. Then actually there's a lot of meaning behind the stories, but that's not always apparent or obvious. And I don't know how much of that really to maybe bring into the party, but I can the good thing is what I've recorded on video. I can actually, because of this medium, I can overlay other information on the screen as well. So I've really just tried to present it as a linear narrative, but we have aspects of the story that move around and come back in, and occasionally we have to set up a few myths. So I've got to dig out an awful lot of Renaissance art, and things like the feast at the House of Atreus, for example. We've got some of this in previous videos, so it will be coming, Babs, absolutely. Excuse me, and I'm looking forward to it. But it's become a bit it's a bit of a monster, and it's got a bit out of hand, and I'm debating whether to chop it up a bit into two. But either way, we'll be presenting either the whole thing or half of it to you next week. But there you go. Yeah, hopefully you'll enjoy it. If you like mythology, it'll be it's an interesting set of myths. Let's see. Sean says my introduction to science fiction was Sci-Fi Fridays on PBS in the States, Doctor Who, Star Trek, The Next Generation, and eventually others. Ah, excellent. Yeah, and that's in the States. I always wondered how Doctor Who went down in the States. Uh, I suppose the whole new modern Doctor Who would have been a big part of my childhood as well. And I suppose, and I don't know, over in the UK, I'd imagine that you can date yourself to who is your doctor, I suppose, if you know what I mean. But which doctor did you grow up with? It's a bit like who's your James Bond. So, for example, well, my James Bond's Roger Moore, for example. It's the one that I kind of grew up with first. But my Doctor Who would be well, it would be Tom Baker. But because of the way the BBC showed the TV, so I suppose the one when I was watching on him live, it would be he'd be the current Doctor when I was a kid. But we got a lot of Patrick Troughton and John Pertwee, and then of course, well, once we got Tom Baker, then we went to Peter Davidson, I suppose, and he wasn't bad. And then we had I don't know that I think in my mind he was the last good Doctor Who of the old Doctors. Oh goodness, who was the guy that was? Oh, I can't remember his name. He ended up in the Hobbit film. I think he was the last Doctor Who before it switched and they made the American one. But they're all different. But Tom Baker, I think, was very good. And I really like John Pertwee. I have to say, I didn't mind too much some of the new Doctor Who's, but they didn't seem very Doctor. And I mean all of them. I think I don't know, seems to have changed a wee bit, and I think it's good to have it for a new generation. I think the new Doctor Who's getting a lot of flack. I think isn't that correct? But I think we're up for another change. But yeah, they're good shows. The Next Generation I thought was pretty good. Whenever we got the Next Generation, Sean, it wasn't on TV, so it appeared in our local video shops, and so I rented Star Trek: The Next Generation, the first Encounter at Farpoint. That was a video, and then the wee video shop. Not all the video shops did that. But then we would go in once a month and we'd get a new episode of The Next Generation for a while, and then it turned up on the TV. But yeah, the Next Generation Star Trek. Next Generation was quite good. It started off a bit rocky, I think, but ended up being not bad at all. Sean McAllister says Tom Baker public broadcasting ran through a storyline each weekend. They replaced the series twice in my memory. Ran through a storyline each weekend. Then replaced the series twice in my memory. Right. Oh yeah. Well, the good thing, I suppose, Sean, what we used to get was we would get one a week on I think on the Thursday, and then you'd find out next week. But then on the Sunday, you would get reruns of old Doctor Who's, and you could I suppose over a 5-episode week. Yeah, goodness, am I remembering right? I'm trying to think. Did you maybe get Doctor Who once a night? Joe Grant and Sarah Jane Smith. We're on to the Doctors. Well, I suppose as a little kid, I was absolutely. Tom Baker had K9 as well. Didn't they? The robot dog, which I was particularly fond of. I suppose it's interesting how you look at things as a kid. But Doctor Who was certainly very scary, and it worked well. It was the show, as they say, that you used to hide behind the sofa and watch it, but you watched it with your whole family. Star Trek's gone a bit skew with at the minute, hasn't it? It's I know there's lots of different versions of Star Trek at the minute, but the Star Trek Discovery show is I don't know, kind of schizophrenic, I think. I'll just add then. Don't be shutting up, Sean. It's keep the comments and chat coming. Red Dwarf and Hitchhikers eventually played too. Excellent. Well, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was on the radio here, Sean, which is kind of where I first encountered it, and I love my radio shows. And that you had the BBC audio version of the Lord of the Rings as well, and then we got very early 1980s, and I've got my DVD of it here somewhere, of the original Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy TV show, which is brilliant. But unfortunately, I've got it with mono audio, so I have to turn the TV up to 90 to listen to it. But I love all the versions of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy because they're all different. But yeah, and Red Dwarf was fantastic. It's great to see a good science fiction comedy. I suppose, because they're few and far between. Hitchhikers is good. The one that I got into most recently a few years back, Sean, is Old Harry's Game, which is yeah, I'd say it's a science fiction comedy. It's set in hell, pardon me, and it's kind of like an existentialist comedy, but it's kind of humanist, and it's very, very funny. If you haven't checked it out, it's Andy Hamilton writes that. Um, so yeah, stuff like that, great. Have you ever read Alan Moore? Absolutely, VT. Excuse me. Bah, bah, bah. I brought up some of my old 2080 stuff to show you guys, but there's the DR and Quench, which I'm a big fan of Alan Moore. I have to say I've got a bit of a problem with Alan Moore, and it's that I got a book token the other year, and I spent it on his Jerusalem, and the three books in the box set, and it's unreadable. As in that the text is so small, and I don't know. I'm going to give it as a present to somebody I don't like, I suppose. But it's the actual books are unreadable as much as they look pretty on the shelf. It's sad because I haven't got round to reading that. But I was having a wee chat about some of the. I brought a couple up here really, but Alan Moore would be a 2080 regular, and so yeah. V for Vendetta, yeah, his own graphic novels and stuff. I think he's fantastic. I would have been a big fan of stuff like this as well. This is Nemesis, the Warlock, which is a science fiction masterpiece. I love it. It's very funny, very dark, extremely well drawn, depending on who the artist is. It's by Brian Talbot, another sort of 2080 stable, if you know what I mean. But and here, I suppose one of my favourites, VT, would be the old ABC Warriors. That's Pat Mills. This is the kind of the original ABC Warriors. My band was called Happy Shrapnel. Let me see. So who is one of the ABC Warriors? So there you go. There he is. That's my band, Happy Shrapnel, named after him. And I've a tattoo of a couple of them actually as well. And who have we got there? That's Grant Morrison, Steve Yule. That's Zenith. Be another. There's so much that came out of 2080. Goodness gracious! I'd argue that the 2080 material for since 1997, almost all of it would make brilliant TV shows and films and stuff. It's fantastic. It really is. You can get a couple of. I got rid of a lot of my comics, I suppose, recently, but occasionally you get wee kind of hardback compendiums. They're quite thick, and I quite like picking the odd one of these up because they have a lot of the old stories, and you get to see some of these. There's Tharg's Future Shocks, There's a Grant Morrison one. There's all sorts in them, and there's some of them are absolutely brilliant. I mean, I think 2080 for a long time was very ahead of its time, and it even published novels, as in comic book form. You'll find, which is something I must pick up actually, but you'll find the Stainless Steel Rat novels in the 2080 in the pages of 2080. They're brilliant. Having them illustrated just adds a whole level of fun to the Stainless Steel Rat. One of my favorites. But yeah, love Alan Moore. To be honest with you, if simply put, I haven't read 2080 in a good few years because it's too dear, and just that it's become when I was a little kid, it was a very affordable thing. But there's if you've worked for 2080, I probably like your stuff. It's as simple as that. Whether you're an artist or a writer, and as I said, they all get periodically pinched by the Americans. There's quite a good documentary about 2080 on DVD. I actually have it. I'm wondering, is it here? There it is. Give me 1 wee second. Tell you what, look what it's on top of. Let's get careful, Judge Dredd. So oddly enough, it's on top. That's the old BBC Hitchhiker's Guide. That is the superior product. I think it's so fun. let me see, what's it called? Oddly enough, just talking about Future Shock, the book. It's called Future Shock, the story of. Sorry, folks. Get the light. Future Shock, the story of 2000 AD. It's a good wee documentary. Um, my understanding is that the American comic houses used to just come over to their building and rent the hotel across the road, and just basically it was an open invitation. But if you worked for 2080, you could walk across the road and get into a job. It's a great wee documentary. I highly recommend it. And 2080 was I suppose, a great. It was very good at introducing you to science fiction as well, and fantasy to a degree. Um, hmm. Be thorough as you need to be, Doc. Be thorough as you need to be, Doc. The Greek vid will be well worth it. I hope so. Yeah. Well, there's a world of Renaissance art, for example, and there's a lot of art from the classical world, and I have actually some pretty good books on Greek and Roman art and architecture, etc. So I shouldn't have a much bother matching images. But I was reading some of it to my wife and son just to sort of get the sound of it. Does it sound okay? And it is very heavy stuff. And it's funny that I was saying I actually find it. We're talking about things that are unpalatable. For example, in this day and age, and it's almost all of it's quite horrific. And I don't really bat an eyelid to about a lot of the stuff. Funny enough, my wife was saying I don't know. I says, is it because we're brought up in Northern Ireland that this just seems not just another bit of madness? I don't know. So yeah, it's heavy stuff, and what we do is we take you from, let's see, we go from Tantalus all down to Pelops, and he's the father of the line, and then we go from Pelops to Atreus and Thyestes, and then we go from those guys down to Agamemnon and Menelaus, who are the Atreidai. And then we go on down to Orestes, and then finally, really, to the Orestes' son, and who's not really a major mythological character. And that's we have the end of the Pelopid line. But it is interesting, I suppose, the little side myths. I love it all. It's and the way I'm working at it, Babs, is that we're putting the work together using the source material. Pretty much a lot of it's coming from Graves's the Greek myths and Apollodorus's library of Greek mythology and his epitome. So Apollodorus's stuff is a kind of it's known as the Bible. It's a Bible of Greek mythology, so library, and he attempted to basically put together as much as not all of it survives, different versions of, I suppose, local flavor of myths, and interpret them in terms of what's going on with the myths. And Graves's books are kind of a couple of thousand years later, an attempt to do the same thing and update the local variety of the myths. A lot of it's to do with concepts of tanistry and things like that. So they're fascinating to me. And the good thing is that using these books, these guys have already gone and done all my work. They've compiled all the different sources. So it's just a question about picking and choosing, because it got to a point where I was just, oh no. I was at just over an hour and going, is this, I could go on here for 2, 3, and it's not. Funnily enough, somebody else we were just watching Only Connect, which is a quiz show here on the BBC. I think somebody had said something about picking, I don't know, specialist topics on Mastermind, and someone had said Greek mythology, I think. Excuse me. And I think they refused it because it was so big. So it's a massive subject, and it's fully integrated with Greek history and so on. And if you take out the mythological overlap, what you have a historical record of something that ultimately, very interestingly, leads to what we call the Bronze Age collapse, which is the economic collapse of the Bronze Age, and the beginning of what we call the Greek Dark Ages. Excuse me. So it's yeah, they're a bunch of nutters. And I suppose the whole point about doing this video is that Frank Herbert demonstrates the point that I'd like to make, I suppose, is that a lot of people say, oh, we get tricked by Frank Herbert, and that we don't know that Paul's a bad guy. Or it's not that he's a bad guy, he's the catastrophic hero, but we don't know how bad he is until Dune Messiah. And I kind of sort of say, well, no, actually, you do know. There are lots of clues, and the first clue is his name. If you see what I mean, and it's uh-oh. And I think I read to you a sort of a quote from Agamemnon by Aeschylus, and it's, this is the family that the gods hate. And I suppose it's interesting how much myths used to be part of our popular culture, our general culture, actually, our storytelling culture before the days of radio and TV. So that I think a lot of the time, where I suppose that's one of the reasons why a lot of people have a bit of bother figuring out Shakespeare, for example. Excuse me, because a lot of the metaphors are to do with Greek and Roman mythology. Mm. But yeah, but my biggest problem with the Babs was I was going, my God, this is so much mythology, and we've got to get the science fiction into it as well. So, but suddenly thinking I'm not making a very, very science fictiony kind of story or narrative, I suppose. But yeah, so I'm very, very happy to have some Michael Moorcock here, and I'm about to start. I'm going to do some videos on the culture. As I said, we started off doing a few things there within our little A to Z of science fiction. And I figure if I'm going to have to start reading some stuff, so just before I hit the culture, we're going to have a wee look at Alfred Bester. I've been deciding what book I want to read, and that if I'm going to have to read a book again, what's it going to be? And it has to be something out of my A to Z list. So soon, I suppose, once we finish the June, I'm going to have a go at this. Excuse me, The Star's My Destination. It's also known as Tiger. And I don't know if you guys know this book or Alfred Bester at all. This book kind of has a relationship to Dune in a funny way, because it's a kind of up yours to John W. Campbell again, along with The Demolished Man, and this is the common man's piece of science fiction, and it's interestingly enough, Babs, you might like this. It's also known as the Iliad of science fiction. Wondering where I read that. I found that years ago, and interestingly, it kind of resembles the Odyssey a wee bit too. But it's known as the Iliad of science fiction because it's if you know the Iliad, the main theme of the Iliad is how does it begin? Sing muse of the wrath of Achilles. So it's about the anger, the wrath of Achilles for having Agamemnon, the Atreides, takes his prize woman from him, Briseis. So the whole Iliad is about a kind of, the main theme of it is, I suppose, Achilles having a huff and refusing to fight over this. But it's not because of it's not known as the Iliad of science fiction because of its epic scope or anything like that. It's because it's the main theme of it is the wrath of Gallifrey. And it is a great book. So I'm really looking. This is meant to be unfilmable, by the way, as well. It's meant to be. I think I know why it's meant to be unfilmable, but I reckon it's doable. So I don't know what you guys think about Alfred Bester, but he's very, very good. I sort of, again, found him in my teens. Monte Cristo in space. It's a good description. Yes, it's a bit of that too. Yeah, very good way of putting it, Sean. I take it you know the book. I love it. It's as I said, it's been. I can't remember. I suppose it was whenever I actually read it the last time. Whenever I bought this edition, special restored text of this edition. It looks like 1996. No, 2000. So this edition published Yeah, I bought this 2006 is when I read that last. That's a while ago, but yeah, very much so. And there's something about Gullyfoyle as well. I think that's meant to be this, this simmering. He's a nothing, isn't he? It's. I tell you what, if you were going to film it, there you go. There's a good piece of music you'd have to use in it, Sean. You'd have to use a fanfare for the common man. That'd be a good way to start that, wouldn't it? I think I'd love to do that, something like that. But yeah, so Alfred Bester's another one of those guys that's a big influence on me. And somebody was mentioning Red Dwarf earlier. It was you, Sean. I don't think you'd have that Red Dwarf humor without the 2000 AD humor. There's jokes in Red Dwarf sometimes that I think wouldn't be out of place in 2000 AD at all. that kind of. But it's a great show, and I think it managed to stay pretty good actually over the years. Don't know what you think. Excuse me. But yeah, anybody else want to fire in any comments about what sort of science fiction? Again, it's a big medium. Um, I suppose when I was younger as well, we had three TV shows or three TV channels until Channel 4 turned up in here. So I think it was the early 80s. So you would get a lot of reruns of old, the Saturday morning or Saturday movie serials, things like Buck Rogers and is it City Under the Sea and the Rocket Man. Is it Rocket Man Cody or something like that? Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. And again, I would have loved those as a young kid. I thought they were really, really good. Yeah. Oh, I'm just trying to think about cartoons and stuff as well. Um, but yeah, so I suppose what we were talking about the Greek mythology aspect of that. Babs, I headed off to university in the early 90s and managed to get myself in over there in London. And it was a big hodgepodge, and I sort of got into quite a lot of interesting stuff over at the time. I read a lot of Ian Banks, got to meet Ian Banks in, I think, 1993. And I got to meet Michael Moorcock the same year, I was suddenly in a place where it's quite interesting being in London where you have access to authors. Someone goes, "Oh, Ian Banks is doing a reading in Kingston. Shall we go?" And like, "Wow, yeah, let's go." And then, not long after that, "Hey, Michael Moorcock, did you want to go?" "Yeah, let's." And it was off we went, and it was it was a completely new experience to me. So yeah, I got into a lot of the odd stuff at university, I suppose. And again, the 90s were a bit like the 60s over in London, I think. And started reading I suppose, a few more comic books, and I was still on 2080 at the time, which was still quite fresh. Though I suppose the Judge Dredd movie appeared in the early 90s, early to mid 90s, and it was atrocious. Must have been 95, I think. Is that Sean saying, "I'd love to see it as a series. It could play well with modern showrunners. They love that style of high emotion drama." Is that the uh, Tiger Stars My Destination you're talking about there, Sean? Babs is saying, "Well, y'all, I'm out. Got a family. Hope to catch you all next Friday." No worries, Babs. Take care. Have a good week. All the best. Best regards to your family. Sean McAllister, agree totally, maintain quality. Red Dwarf could have riffed on The Stars My Destination with Dave. Well, yeah, it could have. Uh, mm, absolutely. I mean, I really enjoyed it at the start, I think. I always think it was interesting. There was a retrospective a few years back, and I don't know if you guys saw this, but it was let's all talk about Red Dwarf. It's Red Dwarf Night. I think we had a Red Dwarf Night on the BBC. And it kind of started off with Patrick Stewart talking about how big a fan he was of Red Dwarf, but how he'd come to sort of see it was he'd been sitting in his, I don't know, in his room one night watching it, and I think the way he put it was, "I was just about to call the Star Trek lawyers to, when he oh, hang on, what's this?" Keith says, "Evening, Doc." Hello, Keith. How are you? We're just chatting about, as I said, it's science fiction and me, and science fiction and you was the topic tonight. So it's kind of any science fiction at all. What I was trying to do was do we kind of run through, I suppose, my life and talk about the different books and films, and suppose, but it's just been a kind of meandering thing. That Judge Dredd was a masterpiece of 90s cheese alongside Total Recall and Starship Troopers. Oh, I mean, yeah. Well, I love Total Recall and I love Starship Troopers. The Judge Dredd, masterpiece of cheese. I will give you that, Sean. Um, Dread dressed by Gucci? That's quite hard to say, isn't it? It was appalling. But it's got the wife to watch it not too long ago, actually, and it is fun, but it's if you're a Judge Dredd fan and you've read the comic over the years, it's I think they put something like 30 years worth of chief justices into one room and shoot them all at once. It's an attempt to squeeze as many things from the comic into the film as possible, I think. But Sylvester Stallone was badly miscast, I think. American cheese. That's what we used to call it. Cheesy, the big heapings of American cheese. But we quite liked American cheesy films, I suppose. But yeah, and it's a thing. I think that Judge Dredd is a British satire, and it's a comment on British society, but it does it by using a futuristic American society. But it's all about Britain. Dread was more true, and it's a shame it didn't get a sequel. I absolutely agree. Um, I am the law. Cheese that comes in a spray. Oh, we're quite. I think a lot. Our cheese is pretty good over here. I have to say. If if you handed me cheese and I don't know, spray can, I don't know what I think we should throw it up in the air and shoot it or something. Would that be the correct use of such a thing? But to consume cheese out of a tin, that's wrong. That's just wrong. I don't know. American hot dogs look really scary as well. Those, what do they call them? Wieners. Um, they just, oh my God, I don't know how people could eat them. But yeah, spray cheese that comes in a spray, that could have a Mad Max use, couldn't it? But like that silver spray stuff. I suppose Mad Max is an interesting one. But yeah, I agree, Sean. By the way, it's a pity they didn't get a sequel, and I think they had ideas of. I've got some of the art books to do with the film, and I really enjoyed it. Um, I have to say, oddly enough, I keep having problems when I go to the cinema. When I went to see Judge Dredd in the cinema, I went to see it twice. I saw it the first time on my own, and for the first 5 minutes, the entire screen was black, and we could hear everything, but we couldn't see a thing. And then the projectionist got the screen working and decided to let the film run, and we had no idea what was going on. I made him put it back. But the second time, I took my wife to see it actually, and really enjoyed it. It was very, very good, I have to say. And the use of 3D, and I think in Dread is one of the best I've seen. It wasn't over the top, but it was particularly with the use of was it slow mo, the drug. I thought was excellent. Hmm. As a gun-toting society, I wholeheartedly support throwing any can into the air and shooting it. Oh dear. Thought that was a bit of an American thing, I suppose. Oh yeah, I suppose. I mean, guns, gun-toting societies. Not things aren't great in America with guns. I think that saying that they're not great here either. There's a lot of guns in Northern Ireland too. There's an awful lot of them buried in farmhouses. Yeehaw. I'll tell you a good one, Keith. For when I was I probably can't tell you the ending to this story, but I'll tell you as a kid, I did GCSE history and did really badly in it and didn't have a great time in the classroom and got a D. And I resat it and asked to go to a different class and had to redo my what do you call it, coursework. So the coursework for the first one was on the Titanic, one of Belfast's claim to fame. But the second time I ended up doing what's called the Larne gun running. Would you believe? This is to do with well, there was Larne, Bangor, and Donaghadee. The Protestants in this country ran in shitloads of German rifles and pistols into these three ports, locked the cops up and stuff, and then distributed them in the event of a kind of Protestant uprising kind of thing. So I think they brought in about something like 35,000 Steyr Mannlicher bolt action rifles and like Mauser broom handle pistols, sort of flintlock shot, all sorts of things, And they're I suppose there was an American politician over here who was kind of involved with the Good Friday Agreement and the whole arms agreement of that. But there are literally weapons all over the place, and they're all hidden in wee outhouses and barns and things and farms around those towns, for example. Well, when I was doing my GCSE project, I got a job as a labourer on one of these farm properties and was asked to clear out an old farmhouse. And guess what I found? So underneath the floorboards, found a Model T Ford engine, right? We had to get it out. And then underneath all of this stuff, we had a couple of these rifles, Mauser broom handle pistol stock, a couple of antique shotguns in oil rags with flintlocks, a whole pile of ammo and stuff and guns, etc., etc. And I can't really speak as to what happened to them, but the conclusion was, I suppose, that during my I got an A, and I scored 100% in my coursework because I actually found some guns. I actually found guns from the learn gun running while I was doing my learn gun running project. There you go. Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. But yeah, the gun running in Northern Ireland, I'm shocked. Hmm. If you watch the news here, we don't. It's all to do with the sophistry of the media, and the government. But they don't like to mention the word terrorist. So if you think that since the Good Friday Agreement that there's peace in Northern Ireland, you'd be gravely mistaken. But if you look for the term, terrorists, is there terrorist activity, etc., you won't find any. Excuse me, because they very seldom use that word. It's if you know what Gangnam Style is, the press here use paramilitary style. Paramilitary style. That's everything that happens in this country that's kind of terrorist related is known as paramilitary style. So we have paramilitary style shootings, paramilitary style bombings, paramilitary style executions, etc., etc. But they're not called. They won't use the word terrorist unless everybody hates the person that did it, I think. But the general gist of it is that the United Kingdom doesn't like to think that there's a bunch of terrorists on their back doorstep, I suppose. But the press always use this term. It's interesting. It's a very specific language. I like to pay attention to things like this, Excuse me. But yes, I suppose in terms of one of the reasons why I was chatting to you about it is that for me, growing up in Northern Ireland, science fiction was a big escape for me, and I had to move around quite a lot. So it didn't really kind of set up any, I suppose, roots anywhere or have any kind of long term relationships or even short term relationships. Kind of as a kid, over, I suppose, the longest I'd lived anywhere my entire life up to leaving school would have been 5 years. Excuse me. Oh no, that's not true. It would have been, yeah, it would have been 5. But more often not, I lived, say, at the most for 2 years in any one place and then moved on. So generally, as I moved about, I kept moving. The only thing that kind of went with me over the years was my science fiction books and my comics, and became a bit of an escape for me. Particularly 2000 AD, sort of daily dose of Judge Dredd, etc. Keith is saying, excuse me, Keith is saying Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted today, so we may be in for another round of riots and violence. Whereabouts are you in the States, Keith? Again, I'm not too sure. I remember we had a wee chat about it before. My memory's like a sieve. Yes, I'd seen the case that this is a 17-year-old boy shooting people with an assault rifle. I think he's. I mean, he was 18 now in court, and yeah, I just caught the news headlines about it. I don't know the details of the shooting, Keith. Oh, you're in Santa Barbara, that's right, just north of Los Angeles. Not too sure, but it seemed that he took a weapon from his home and deliberately went somewhere to protect property or something like that, I believe, and ended up shooting. Was it how many people? I don't know, 2 or 3. I don't know what's. I mean, we've something that we saw very recently, Keith, and hopefully I don't seem to be beating down on America too much. America's got lots of positives as well as negatives. Don't get me wrong, but it was I don't like guns, for example. I'll tell you, even my son growing up, we wouldn't let him have a toy gun, nothing. And if he wanted a water pistol, it had to be bright yellow and orange and pink. If you understand that, it had to in no way resemble a weapon. A lot of kids get shot in the troubles here running around with toy guns by jittery cops and jittery soldiers. Even kids with paintbrushes, the shadow looked like a gun. There's one that I remember in particular. But one thing I had noticed, we saw a program and it was about a father and he'd bought his daughter. Now I know a wee bit about guns, to be honest with you, far too much than I should. But he bought his daughter a Heckler. I think it was a Heckler and Koch MP5 submachine gun, and it was yellow and pink, and fluffy and cutesy, and I, oh my god, and it was the fact that that doesn't look like a lethal weapon. That looks like a kid's toy. I suppose that kind of made me go, "What on earth?" But I'm a 17-year-old in this country is a child. Keith, to be honest with you, legally you're not an adult until you're 18. I can't imagine giving a child a gun. Um, and I've been a child who's fired a lot of guns as a child, and shouldn't have, if you see what I mean. But it's I don't know. It's sad and it's stupid, but assault rifles have no place in civilized society. I think as a gun-toting society, wholeheartedly support throwing in a can. Sorry, just catching up the thread there, Keith. It was ruled self-defense. How to get off with premeditated multi-manslaughter. He shot 3, killed 2, and wounded 1. The guy who wounded said in open court he pointed a pistol at Rittenhouse just before Rittenhouse shot him. Prosecution bundled it badly. There's a lot of people with guns. I suppose in this country, the thing that people get is that they use their children as human shields and as weapons against the police, so that they'll put their own kids out. And we had an appalling shooting here in Northern Ireland not too long ago, which was Lyra McKee, I might be mispronouncing her first name, who was a very young journalist, who was shot at random in the head by some arsehole with a gun. But he's a terrorist, by the way, and it pretty much looked like he was a child, which is the sad thing, because it's a new generation of murder, death, kill in Northern Ireland. You see that it's kind of sometimes in this country the sins of the father are the sins of the son, because the fathers will make sure that their sins are passed on, if you see what I mean. But prosecution bungled it bad. It's hard to Keith, to get a grasp on it, because there are actually quite a lot of firearms now in Northern Ireland that are legally owned, and it's hard to sort of look at guns in a society where they're okay. I don't know, but I suppose it's I'll tell you, I hate guns. I absolutely hate them, and I can't really go into the full details of why I hate them, but I absolutely despise the things. They're far too powerful, far too lethal, and the only thing you need to do to kill a person is that. Nothing up here, no thought, they're too lethal, and they're incredibly dangerous. They have no place, I think, and I don't know. I'm not particularly into solving my problems with violence. I don't mind using force, but that's a different thing. But yeah, it's and the idea of I'm going to go to the town to protect the property, and that people end up dead, sends out a rather strange message that property is worth more than people. Um, Terrorist or paramilitary. Yeah, they're synonymous, to be honest with you. It's interesting. The word para actually has lots of different meanings, but one of them is just not as good as in a bit shit, as opposed to the obvious one. But yeah, so yeah, we had. I mean, that was just basically the Lyra McKee shooting is basically an adult paramilitary, if you like, or this is one of the new IRAs or something. Diet IRA, I don't know what they're called. Prefer IRA 0 myself, but yeah. So what they do is they hand a loaded gun to a child and go, "There's police people over there, where there's also journalists and other kids and stuff. Go and fire that gun just like that into a crowd, And that's how that wee girl was killed. It's very sad. I wrote actually at the time, really upset us in the house. I wrote a wee poem that's up on the station, Swords it's called, and it's kind of about that, I suppose, but there's a wee dedication to that girl at the end of it. Uh, I understand your position, how guns could make someone uncomfortable. I own a few, but nothing like an AR-5. Keith, it's I've grown up with the guns in the house. It's not I'm not being but they are lethal weapons. I think it's a societal thing. I think, and but I suppose the old days people carried knives were not comfortable with that. We don't need to be going around killing each other. I can understand keeping a gun for for hunting, or for a necessity. A farmer keeping a gun for pest control. There's reasons you can have a gun if you like. Um, but yeah, I'm not fond on them at all. I have to say, and yeah, hmm, yeah. But yeah, don't like them at all. I don't. It's about put it this way. Think a person who's drunk in possession of a gun. Mm, that's where things start to become a problem. It's whenever people's judgment's out the window, and it's the thing is that we can all make mistakes in life. We can be stupid, we can make a total dick of ourselves. Sometimes, as I like to say, the trick is not to mind too much, but it's the consequences are. You can make a dick of yourself in some ways, but with a gun, if you make a dick of yourself, it's not exactly like you can, make amends. I suppose it's an undoable thing to kill another human being. I bought mine for hunting, ended up never doing it. Haven't shot anyone in 10 years. Yeah, it's there are places in the world where weapons like that are a necessity for survival. It's there's a it's a, who should have guns. I think Keith, I'm sure you're a responsible, intelligent human being, but a 17-year-old boy is not, in my mind, a responsible, not legally responsible in this country. Well, they're legally, they should not be in possession of a weapon. If you can't buy a pint of beer, legally in a pub, how could you have a? I suppose at least you can go buy an assault rifle and then go to the pub and demand a pint of beer. If you see what I mean, it depends on how. I don't know. It's just I suppose it's the incredible power it gives you. Murder, Death, Kill, another 90s cheese fest. Demolition Man. I love Demolition Man. Show. It's a very funny film, and it's more Judge Dredd from Sylvester Stallone than Judge Dredd was, I thought. But I think it's a great movie. I think it's very funny. I have to say, Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. There's a chap that does a science fiction channel, Keith. I don't know if you guys know him. I think his name's Moyd Moidenhoff. I think what's his channel called? Media Death Cult. And I subscribed to his channel for a wee bit, and he's I think he's an industry insider of some kind, and he's an interesting chap, and he articulates himself well, and he's well into his science fiction. I'd say he's about my age, and he he still doesn't know how to use the three shells. He hosts the show like a bit like I am here, sitting in front of his. I think he's a bit more professional and is a bit more clued up on how to do things than myself. But he wears a gun, and it looks like a Beretta, and in a shoulder holster, and he's over here in England, I think. And I just and he talks about it's a media death cult. It's a prop. It's and it's meant to be a bit of fun. I find it deeply uncomfortable. I have to say, I'll tell you a good story, Keith. Once upon a time, one of the first weeks I was in university over in London, and I was walking along in Twickenham. I was walking along Radnor Park, you call it, just by the River Thames. And I'm walking along with a bunch of people that I'd met and was getting to know, and we were all kind of in the same boat. We'd all just landed in London and like, shall we go down to town and have a look around? And as this is true, as we were walking along, I think it was like a big trike went past us and it backfired. The big bang out of the motorbike, and I flung myself over the wall of the from the footpath, the Radnor Park's there, and the wall, and it actually down into a bunch of rose bushes, which I landed. So just the guy on his motorbike gave a big bang backfire, and I literally didn't wait for love nor money and just flung myself over the wall. And I thought it was a gunshot, or I didn't care what it was, but I wasn't wanting to be around. And all my mates were going, where'd he go? And hello, and I'm down there and I'm picking myself up, and they're all going, what the hell's what the hell's with this guy? It's good to have reflexes, I suppose. But that's a true story. And I kind of had to, yeah, no, didn't really have to relax too much. That was in London, I suppose. But yeah, I would react a certain way to certain things, I suppose. It's interesting though, because I suppose when you take a kind of like science fiction weaponry, I used to think about we're talking about science fiction that influenced you when you grew up. If you asked about what pieces of technology influenced you most when you grew up, I could say like things like the pot. You could go with the potty, book, TV, car bomb, pistol. That's my five. I wouldn't mind radio in there as well, but it would be true. The mystique of the Old West here in the US, much of American science fiction was inspired by Westerns and share a history in the pulp literature. Totally agree, Sean. It's a wee point to make really early on, I think, in the very first sort of PhD video. Excuse me, my throat's. I should drink more, really. That would stop me coughing all the time. Yeah. Demolition Man is a great film. I really do enjoy it. I think it's because it's quite tongue in cheek and the three shells, Keith, as you see. I think it's yeah, I think it's great. I think it's very funny. The gun-toting white black hat becomes the ray gun-toting hero villain. I think that's why Westworld works so well. Is that the new Westworld, Sean? I haven't seen any of it. I have seen the old Westworld, and I've got the Michael Crichton book. Excuse me. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a slug of honey here, help my throat out. But I haven't seen the new one at all, and I didn't know what to think about it. I'll tell you something. That one of the things that I really am not sure of. I watched the first episode of Cowboy Bebop tonight, and I'm a bit. I'm not too sure. I think it's all right. But what I don't like is when we take a small work and turn it into, and I'd say, The Man in the High Castle. I don't know what's happened with that, and I kind of haven't gone near it because A, I like the book so much, but B, I can't figure out how you can get 5 years worth of TV out of it. And I was kind of wondering the same about Westworld, because we did have a Westworld movie. Was there Future World as well? Excuse me, here comes the honey. Right, excuse me. Oh, that's good for the throat, folks, I have to tell you. But yeah, the Western and science fiction, particularly the pulps, as you say, there's a big relationship with them, and I suppose you get some of the obvious stuff with where people like to go and just let's go be obvious about it. Firefly, I would argue, is a show like that. But I think, what is it? Things like Lost in Space, I think, really had that. The original Lost in Space, I've seen the first one of the new one, but that kind of, yeah, the US, the pioneer spirit, frontier. And because I suppose the development of the history of America was about pushing the new frontier, really, wasn't it? And I suppose our fascination with, as much as it's not all to do with science fiction, it's space, but space and the inner space of the mind are those new frontiers. The undiscovered country. That's death, isn't it? Let's have a wee look just to catch up. But yeah, it's I'm trying to think of some good sci-fi westerns actually, because I think some of the post-apocalyptic ones were a wee bit like that. I'm trying to think on things like Demolition. Is it Demolition Alley or something like that? I miss ray guns, Sean. Usually the gun-toting white black hat becomes the ray gun-toting hero villain. I think that, the old Art Deco aesthetic of all those rocket ships from Flash Gordon and the ray guns and stuff like that. The cowbop, let's see, just to catch up. The Old West has been so heavily romanticized by Hollywood as this lawless anything goes land. Most Old West towns would have you check in your revolver on entering city limits. I'm quite interested in some of it, Keith. I'll tell you, if you do know me, you'll know that I'm Doc Sloan, and that I actually said to someone once upon a time, and this is actually true, that I wanted to get a PhD so that I could call myself Doc. This is when I was a bit younger and more immature, I suppose, but I haven't really changed that much. And it was because of Doc Holliday, and that's absolutely true. Talk about reasons why people do a PhD. Um, I just did it for myself, but I wanted the title, and that's it. That is the absolute truth of it. So I'm a big fan of Doc Holliday. I would argue semi sort of kindred spirit. I don't know, but I like him a lot. The real Doc Holliday, that is. Yeah, there's. We certainly know the myths of, for example, Billy the Kid as a William Antrim, as one another Irish export, sort of. Yeah, the Wild West is interesting. It seems to be brutal, but at the same time, it develops and it civilizes, doesn't it? And but it is quite a. I do like the westerns. I have to say, some of the older westerns. I quite like the genre. My dad would be a big fan of western movies, but particularly the Dollars trilogy and things like that. Grimdark says the Cowboy Bebop anime is fantastic. The Netflix show looks like soulless trash. Also, hey Doc, hey Grimdark, nice to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining us. I watched the first one tonight. I want to see use of weapons. Yeah. I'll tell you what. Let me cover these bits. I watched the first Cowboy Bebop tonight, Grimdark, and you know what? My major excuse me, I didn't have a major criticism of it because I was just kind of. I suppose you probably figured out I'll watch something, absorb it, and then have a think. But the one thing I got from it was in the attempt to kind of reconnect. I kind of almost reshoot things from the first episode. It was movement, really, and particularly in combat. And I was just thinking, as much as it's looking good, some of the space stuff and all, the movement was wrong, and it seemed kind of slow compared to. I thought the action in the anime was much more kinetic. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to say, Grimdark, that I think that. Excuse me, folks. I'm just going to say this right now, Grimdark. Cowboy Bebop is the best anime ever made, as far as I'm concerned. It's amazing. For as a series, as a standalone single series, I absolutely love it, and I've been a big fan of it for a long, long time. Um, So I'll give it a chance, but and I think that they're trying to do something new, but I don't know, are they or aren't they? Obviously, they've made a big change right away in the first episode. Um, but yeah, I don't know if you've seen all of it yet, Grimdark. I know they've rolled out the series, but I caught the first episode of it, and I caught the first episode of The Wheel of Time, which I never read, and I thought I'd give it a chance as well and see what it looked like. And at the end of it, I just thought that was incredibly derivative of Lord of the Rings, the first episode. But the Bebop, yeah, I think it's trying to do homage to a lot of things and then try to do something fresh, and I'm not too sure what it's about. But it's got a look. But it's yeah, I don't know. A cartoon can do things. I suppose that cartoons only limited by the imagination of the artists and how they draw. But I love Cowboy Bebop. I have to say, I love the music, love everything about it. And I've got Radical Edward tattooed on my leg. By the way, I've got a Radical Edward Funko Pop somewhere as well. But yeah, I've a big tattoo of Radical Edward on my leg, guys. Because I really like the Radical Edward, I have to say. Want to see use of weapons, Angus says. Angus, hi Angus. I'd love to see. I think that's Angus. We're just chatting about. I've just picked up a few books today, and I had all of the Ian Banks culture books, but had seemed to have lost my copy of Consider Fleabas, which is pretty good, and it's the first one. And then, but you know something? I think the best of the first ones is use of weapons, and I think it's really it's a cracker. I think Consider Fleabas is if you were going to introduce someone to the culture, one of the novels, I would go with this one first. and then consider Flaybas. But you don't have to really read them in a particular order. I don't think. But Use of Weapons is an Accession. I think are early favorites of mine. But I think his last three books, Angus, were masterpieces. They're amazing. Um, Absolutely brilliant. The new Westworld, says Sean, yes, pretty good overall, especially the first and third season. Excuse me. The Expanse books and show were pretty solid. Some good hard science fiction. I haven't read the books, Grimdark, but I've been watching the show. And if it's anything like the books, I noticed things like I've played Mass Effect, and I'm kind of noticing things that I've seen in Mass Effect that were in this show, and I'm wondering. I know Mass Effect lifts lots of stuff from lots of different science fiction, but the show was so far pretty good. I've enjoyed it. Yeah, it's excellent. I'll probably get round to them at some point. I suppose from my point of view, Sean, is that because I'm doing the science fiction station, I'm wanting to introduce people to a lot of, I suppose, either classic or really good obscure science stuff that I know about that I think a new generation maybe it's such a big field, I suppose, that aren't aware of, So I have set up my camp, I suppose, in terms of looking back at certain books that I'm going to reread again. And I'm a bit gutted because that often prevents me from reading new stuff. I've got several volumes of short stories on the go at the minute. But I have decided that in order I'm going to pile through Stars My Destination, and then I'm going to hit Consider Flaybass, because I'd like to do stuff on the culture books, and I've just dug up a lot of what's called the Banksonian, which are I have all of the issues of it's an E&M Banks culture fanzine. So I'm having a wee nosy at them. I'm actually trying to get them printed out, but I haven't got my printer connected up. Excuse me. But yeah, new science fiction is tricky, I think, guys, and it's and I don't even know the Expanse books. I imagine Grimdark aren't that new, if you see what I mean. I tend to think of what's about, and it's been around for a few years. But I'm wondering, yeah, it's always good to have. I'm curious to see where's the new ideas, what's really good that's creeping through. But there's so much. And science fiction's being, literature as well as all other things is being mass produced these days. Very much, and I'm after quality, I think, rather than always after quality rather than quantity. Sean saying Westworld is seeming updated. Haven't seen the first or read the book. Big data plays a big role. The creation of AIs and building deceased persons as AIs seems fresh. Oh, have you not seen? Well, if you haven't seen Westworld the movie, it's oh goodness, what do you call it? Thanos' daddy, and it's Yul Brynner it's really good. It's a great film. There was spin-off stuff from it. I think there was a TV series, if I'm remembering rightly, but I know there was a future world. But again, this is when I was very young. This must have been 70s or early 80s stuff, Sean. So it's a bit like Logan's Run. There was a Logan's Run TV show back then. There was a Planet of the Apes TV show back then. I suppose things haven't really changed that much. Yeah. Hi, there's Ryan. Ryan the Scar saying, "Hey all, hello Ryan." Excuse me. Keith saying the shootout at the OK Corral was about cowboys having illegal weapons. The Earps went to disarm them, they refused, and the shootout started. Tombstone, the city maintains a mystique and tourist industry on the road between Tucson and places like Bisbee, Arizona. Yeah, I'd imagine it's a pretty much up on the whole mystique of that. It is. It's yeah. I've read up a good bit on the reality of the gunfight at the OK Corral. It's an interesting thing. Yeah. And it's I suppose law. It is a law and order issue, isn't it? Wyatt Earp's an interesting chap too. And yeah, Ryan the Scar, Neon Genesis Evangelion. That's I watched that a few years back, and I've actually now know that there's multiple endings and stuff. Can I just say first of all, I love the word. What is it? Evangelion is a misreading of Greek. It should be Evangelion. It's meant to be good angel, and there's no such word as Ev. That's an interesting one. But yeah, what a weird kind of I don't know how to put it. Neon. I mean, it's excellent, isn't it? It's got all sorts of apocalyptic mythology, and it's very much a kind of end of the world type. Really depressing in some places. I thought Neon Genesis Evangelion very good. But it just the look of it was a bit nuts, though, I have to say. The year's shootout took place was the most violent year in Tombstone's history, I think, with a grand total of 6 deaths that year. Serial Project EO. Did you read Childhood's End, Arthur C. Clarke? I did, Keith. Yes, long time ago. I read that one in my teens. Yeah, I would have read a lot of Arthur C. Clarke. Arthur C. Clarke, Asimov in particular. I would have a lot of their stuff when I was very young. Childhood's End is excellent. I really like it. It's a yeah. Again, he's got a few of those stories. That I was chatting about the two stories of Time and Stars this week compendium. This one's got the Sentinel in it as well, I think. But the 9 billion names of God, that's the other one. Isn't that where they create a computer that's going to work out all the different names of God, and whenever it comes up the last one, just blank. But it's not quite the same sort of thing. But he does like to sort of look at kind of evolutionary omega points and the aspect of the devil and human mythology. I think it's really interesting. It's a good book. Arthur C. Clarke. I suppose I'm not. I would have liked his short stories much more. I've got a chunk of his stuff here. 2001's really good. I enjoyed it. But as I said, that this is probably. I really do like Arthur C. Clarke's short stories, and I absolutely love them, to be honest. And I mean, Asimov's pretty good too in that field, but yeah, not so much. I think Asimov and Clarke are much better in the short story field. They're not as good wordsmiths, I think, as many of the writers. They're idea machines, as I like to say. Do the embellished histories and fictions of the West overwhelm the reality of it? Oh, you're still on Neon Genesis Evangelion. Yeah, quite hard to say that, isn't it? Mass Effect was pretty good when you disregard the ending. Oh yeah, the last Mass Effect thing, that was a bit. System Shock 2 is going to be released soon. I haven't played System Shock, Ryan. I suppose all of those games, I don't play too many games, but I suppose Mass Effect would have been those kind of sandpit games, Mass Effect, and played all of those, and I would like Fallout 3, but didn't go any further. And Skyrim, the Elder Scrolls, but again didn't go any further. Those kind of games, quite interesting, but you can lose your life on them easily enough. Excuse me. I'll bet there was plenty of crap produced back with the old sci-fi, just the good stuff that stood up and is remembered. Survivor bias. There is plenty of crap produced back then, Keith, but I love it as well. That's the thing. It's a different kind of crap. A lot of the crap I think back, there's a lot of poor movies. I suppose even with old sci-fi, whether it be, I suppose that there's plenty of naff short stories, plenty of naff books, weird ones, but some of the TV and films, again, I quite, if that's what you're talking about, I do appreciate them. Some of the efforts that they're put into them, given the time, I suppose. That's the way I like to look at it. It's very easy to look at Flash Gordon, black and white from the 1940s or something, go, that looks shit, because of look at June in 2021. But I always like to consider things in their time. Westworld with Yul Brynner was a nice flick. It was indeed. It's a very iconic role for him. I understood that he only wore black for a long time, didn't he? It's meant to be quite a big, really good photographer, Yul Brynner, I believe. Took a lot of photos on set. Need to read some classics. I ordered an anthology put together by Asimov of 1930s sci-fi. Neon Genesis Evangelion is real hard on Christian symbolism, Christian and Jewish symbolism, to be accurate. Yeah, it's a lot of what is it they call it, angel stuff and things like that. So yeah, all mythology. I find something interesting to do with there's a story in the Bible called to do with the Dial of Adaz, and it's actually a story to do with turning the sun back. I think it's in Book of Kings, and yeah, it also matched up with one of the stories that we were talking about earlier to do with the Atreides. It's actually a feat attributed to Atreus. And I sorry, jumped off a wee bit of a sidetrack there with the Christian and Jewish symbolism. Yeah, it is, I do think it looks really interesting. For that, it's a visually mad thing, but it's quite cool, I have to say. Lots of names I'm only partly familiar with: Weintraub, Leinster, Sturgeon, Sivak, and others. Seems over and over again. Modern sci-fi reworks or builds on established science fiction ideas. Yeah, it happens a lot within the science fiction community, I suppose, Sean. A lot of just because the ideas there doesn't stop a whole pile of writers approaching it and having a go at it. Because there are certainly tropes within science fiction, but you'll find a lot of science fiction writers really, or poor science fiction writers, just kind of like the trappings of science fiction rather than using it to kind of explore any big ideas or anything. Thresher Maws and Mass Effect are the equivalent of sandworms from Dune. Yes, they are. I always thought that was quite. I thought they were excellent. Thresher Maws need more hammers to be attracted in Mass Effect, while in Dune sandworms are attracted by thumpers. I recently reread Ringworld. It really shows how much Niven should really just come up with the ideas and let someone else write. Ringworld, I haven't read, Keith, but I've read Riverworld, the whole Riverworld series, which I have up there behind me somewhere, and a big box set. There it is. That's the Riverworld series with the fabulous riverboat and To Your Scattered Bodies Go, etc. Mm. Oh, wait a minute, hang on. That's Ringworld. That's Larry Niven. You're saying Ringworld. I thought that was one of Philip Jose Farmer's word book, because he has a few books that are not set on the Riverworld. If you see what I mean, I wonder if they linked up. No, I haven't read Ringworld. Keith, I have to say, how much Niven should really just come up with the ideas and let someone else write. Goodness, is it Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle? What's the one? I'm trying to remember it. It's The Mote in God's Eye. Is a really good book. An absolute cracker, actually, I think. Grimdark says 1979 Flash Gordon was also produced by Dino De Laurentiis besides the Lynch film he produced. Well, yeah, the Dino De Laurentiis, I mean, they were churning out a lot of those kind of genre movies at the time, but they were responsible for Conan the Barbarian, and weren't they? I think maybe it was Flash Gordon. Goodness, what else? Probably I think things like Red Sonja and stuff. But yeah, I love Flash Gordon. I think it was great. A very, very silly film. Keith said not familiar with Riverworld. Keith, Riverworld is Philip Jose Farmer. It's quite a famous science fiction series. I would tell you that the sort of beginning of Riverworld is ripped off by The Matrix. The first book is called To Your Scattered Bodies Go. If you're familiar with some of the kind of works where we get lots of real people or literary characters together, the idea is that everybody who's ever existed from something like 90,000 BC up until 1982 or something like that are all reincarnated on a planet that has a river running around its P axis. And there's mountain ranges on either side, and you can't range from it. And all the people over those years, except for the insane children under 5, are reincarnated on this planet. They've all had their own deaths, and it's a very interesting book. The major characters in it are Richard Francis Burton, Alice Liddell, the real Alice in Wonderland, Mark Twain, John de Longford, for example. It's a really interesting set of books, and it led me to a lot of other reading. It led me to find out about Richard Burton, led me to find out about Lai Po and Tu Fu, these Chinese warrior poets. So a little bit more about John de Longford. So it's a really one of those, and it's kind of metaphysical. If you're into kind of the mysticism of Dune and stuff, Richard Francis Burton was very into pursuing mysticism and I think tried to become a Sufi master and so on. So it's kind of about ascension, I think, if I want to go that far. There's no messiahs, by the way, on the planet either. So Jesus and Buddha aren't there either. Uh, but anyway, it's a series of books. Richard Francis Burton would be the main character. There's meant to be other planets in the series. That's when I thought Ringworld was one of them. So, for example, there's meant to be a planet with all the kids on them. And I think I must have a look. But Philip Jose Farmer must have. I think he wrote a few more. Excuse me. But they're really good books. I read them a long time ago. I'll just bring them down for you. Hang on. As I said, the famous, I suppose, the scene where Neo wakes up in the out of the Matrix into the real world. That's very much to your scattered bodies go. You'll see what I mean. There's the cover. So that's the first one there. This is the only I've read some Philip Hose. I think I might have read a couple of his short stories, possibly, but this is all I've ever read of the author. I'm not sure how I got into it, but it was probably because I saw a box set like this in the charity shop. It says it's originally £9, but I think I paid something like 30p or something for it. But they're To Your Scattered Bodies Go, The Fabulous Riverboat. Can't make out the title of that one. Oh, hang on. The Dark Design, The Magic Labyrinth, and Gods of Riverworld. And I think there may be more, but that's the original ones I read. Read them in my teens, and thoroughly enjoyed them. I haven't read them since, but it's one of those books that simply, I think if you're like me and you like to read around a subject, take you all over the place. It's really fun in the same kind of way that June would, I suppose. Very interesting, you know. Niven seemed crucial in developing the genre. I'm not sure you get Banks without him. Not just for orbitals, the puppeteers play a culture like interventionist role in the Kazinti development. It's I think I know what you're talking about. Ringworld's one of those ones that I've seen in the science fiction classics, and I get the gist of it. I think I will get round to reading it at some point. If you want to read Philip Jose Farmerson, well, To Your Scattered Bodies Go is a reasonably thin. It's not too thick a book, and I would give you a good introduction to the Riverworld series. And if you didn't like it, you could just kill it with that book, I suppose. But yeah, The Moat in God's Eye, that's a great book. I really enjoyed that, Keith, I have to say. Dino and his daughter, I believe, as producer. I'm trying to think of the other films that they did, but they did quite a few back then, and they're yeah, a big fan of the Flash. It is it's a very well regarded film. I think it's a cheesy film, and yeah, over the top, camp, hilarious. I think it's a great bad film in some ways, if you know what I mean. Queen's soundtrack was amazing. Absolutely, the battle theme is amazing. Dude, I'm a big Queen fan myself. Up until Freddie died, I have to say. Sean McAllister, Moties are terrifying, evolving in all ecological niches. Moties. Give us some. Can you remind me? Moties, what's that? Moties, the moats? Is that what they're called on it? I haven't read it in ages. I must be. Yeah. I'm trying to remember how they look like. I always thought, oh dear. I'll have to read that again at some point. It's the Moties. Sean. I'll have to read that again. I've only read it once, but I remember really liking it. And there was something I particularly liked about the ships and the technology. It just seemed a good read. There's certain sci-fi books a wee bit like that, I suppose. Yeah, it's a first contact book, isn't it? Really, I think. I can't remember it at all. I was just trying to remember, Sean. I might be mixing it up, and I'm thinking about the Moties. I thought that were they like little pigs, but I'm thinking about. I think I'm thinking about the animals from Speaker for the Dead, the second of the Ender books. It's funny how sometimes you get things mixed up in your head, you know. Ringworld is great because the idea of the Ringworld itself, the writing and plot kind of suck, but it's one of the greatest premises in all sci-fi. I have to check it out at some point, Keith. What about I have no mouth and I must scream? Oh, excuse me, that's our girls. Yeah, Harlan Ellison. Ryan, the bleakest story ever told. I reference that story quite a bit. I did I haven't read a lot of Harlan Ellison. I have to say I've read a good bit of the odd short stories here and there over the years, and I had a wee science fiction book. I think it was a collection of his stories, and I think it contained the original script for The Soldier, as I recall, which is the Outer Limits episode of you know of his story, and it was basically the story that was nicked for the Terminator. But I did a wee I did a video recently on A Boy and His Dog. Ryan, I don't know if you saw it, and just reading up on Harlan Ellison and some of his stuff at that point. He's they're certainly putting together a lot of his collected works into some nice new editions, and that's exactly what that book was. What was it called? Bloods Are Over. All the Vic and Blood stories, which I absolutely love. So yeah, I have no mouth. I must scream. Yeah, I know how that feels sometimes as well. Yeah, slugs it's like slugs in the big. I can't remember, Ryan. Moties of the aliens from the moats in God's eye. Correct. I don't know. I always that's what I was just trying to rack my memory, and I was imagining them like pigs, like little pigs. But I'm pretty sure that's wrong. But then I think then my memory was making a connection to pretty sure Speaker for the Dead. These wee pigs that plant trees or something. Oh, the things stuff that I read in the 90s, I suppose, and I think that's one of the guys interesting things for me is that ultimately I'm going to looking forward to rereading some of this stuff because I've read that much of it over the years. It's not all that stuck in the head. I suppose the old getting older and the memory starting to go a bit. I suppose. Mm. But yeah, it's so I suppose we were talking about science fiction throughout the ages. After I did my classics degree, I'm pretty much unemployable, sort of. I've always worked in bars and stuff, barman. And I went and did this master's degree in science fiction literature in Liverpool, where I got a job, and it meant I could just do this degree while working, and it was a nice thing. So that in particular, it was a 1 year course where you didn't really have classes; you just had to read shitloads of science fiction organized in all sorts of ways. And that's where I really encountered an awful lot of science fiction that was outside of my personal sphere of influence, if you know what I mean. And it was a great fun course to do. I did it with about 5 people, and I think we were the second people to do it. It was in Liverpool, and yeah, linked up to the Sidney Jones Library. I think it was set up something to do with Arthur C. Clarke and Ursula Le Guin, I think originally. Something to do with the foundation there, I think. So yeah, it was an interesting course, and the special author, for example, that we did one entire course was on Philip K. Dick. I would have done a course on feminist science fiction. Goodness, what else? I suppose robots, minds, and intelligence. These kind of things, and looked at different big bulks of science fiction. Usually, we're reading about 4, 5, 6 books a week. And then having to go in and discuss and do questions and so on. So it opened my mind up to an awful lot of stuff. Excuse me. And I suppose ultimately then whenever I went and then I did another master's in computing and information systems and became a lecturer. And then kind of when it came to PhD time, I was going to do something in mythology. Had a bit of a funny experience with the people involved and ended up going with my second choice, which was Dune. And that's how I ended up doing a PhD on it. And that's my kind of little thread, I suppose, of sci-fi, bits of sci-fi. I just wanted to catch up to current day, and now I'm doing this science fiction station. But yeah, loads and loads of stuff that I love about science fiction. There's so many things just trying to remember just to mention tonight, I think. But the general gist of it, guys, was what science fiction do you love? Is there any science fiction that's had a big impact on your life or anything like that, that has opened your eyes. I love, let me see, Movies of the Aliens from Mooks and Gods. I went to movies like slugs in the beginning. Does somebody have a go with that? I think got a picture like big black slugs in my head. Not too sure on that one. I've got the book there behind me. I'll have to have a look. I actually think I have it on PDF somewhere, actually. Grimdark says, I love the Expanse's premise. Earth is a political, overpopulated power, while Mars is a technological and military power working to terraform itself. The outer fringes have the Belters fighting both. Yeah, it's got a good political setup there. It's I'm wondering, is there some kind of other overlap within the story? But yeah, it shows, I suppose, ultimately, it's, if you think about colonization, it runs a similar set of themes, that if you set out to colonize a place, then eventually it's going to want to, it's about the flow of goods and etc. But ultimately, that place wants to become independent. It's kind of it's an ongoing thing, I suppose, in human history. I got a big picture. Didn't Destiny took its themes from The Expanse? Destiny. Not too sure what you mean there, Ryan. I'm not too sure what Destiny is. I watched a video some days ago where the host claimed that Ayn Rand is also science fiction. Well, she's a science fiction. Well, she claims to be a science fiction writer, isn't she? Well, what's the ones that she's associated with? Is it she Atlas Shrugged? Ayn Rand's a bit of a nut, I thought. I know an awful lot of American Silicon Valley, what would you call them? I suppose baby boomer entrepreneurs are all, there's an awful lot of them called Rand, I believe. It's become a popular first name for men in America because of her. But I haven't read the books. I know a bit about her. Yeah, I don't think she's a very individualism and stuff like that, isn't it? As much as we're all individuals, I think she's trying to sell some kind of bullshit. And quite frankly, I think Ayn Rand was just massively sexually frustrated, and that's all there is to say about it. And she was incredibly, incredibly bitter. That's the gist over it. That's the gist I got about her. I thought she was a bit of a nut. Yeah, I don't know. There's echoes of other people I think a bit like her, I suppose. But whether, I don't know. I've never read anything by her. If you want to get a wee bit of an insight into her, have a look at. There's a documentary called All Watched Over by Machines of Love and Grace. It's a BBC documentary. Have a look at that. It discusses her, and her impact, I suppose, upon America. Quite interesting. Technocracy. The force of the Ryan, do you know what technocracy means in Greek? It is the force of arts and crafts. There you go. I love it when people come up with these words. It's great. Techne is arts and crafts in Greek. So technology is literally the study of your arts and crafts. Keith Kolb says, with two dexterous right arms and one heavily muscled left arm, whose musculature attaches to the head so that Motis have no left ear to match the large membrane-like right ear. Excellent description. The backbone is jointed round and flexible, and the entire upper body swivels to turn the head. The face is simple and incapable of expression. Gestures replace facial expressions. From Wikipedia. Thank you, Keith. Excellent. Two dexterous arms, one heavily muscled left arm, whose musculature attaches to the head. I've been looking at some science fiction art there, trying to come up with something for title cards, and I like promoting a nice bit of sci-fi art when I do an episode. And I was looking at something that seemed quite similar to that. Saying that, it sounds a bit similar to the Adirans and Consider Fleabas as well, though I don't think their third arm is attached to their their head. I think American libertarianism and Ayn Rand's ideals are impractical and selfish. I believe in an expanded social safety net. Guess it was another story then. Sorry. Somebody mentioned just jumping back there. I watched the video game where the host claimed that Ayn Rand is also science fiction. Well, yeah, I think it depends on how you look at it. I don't, as I said, I don't know the book, Ryan. Angus, sorry, I missed your comment there, Angus. The Saga of the Pliocene Excise by Julian May. I've never read that either. It's always something that I saw on the bookcase, especially, I think very much probably in the 80s. Never got round to those. Have they something to do with Irish myth? I don't know. I might be recalling a conversation that somebody had with me about those books, Angus, but I have not read them, I'm afraid. There's so many stuff we haven't read at all. American libertarianism and Ayn Rand's ideas are impractical. I don't know the whole libertarian and liberal, I think, seem to be bad words in America. I don't know. The same over here, I think. All about sort of segregating your society and splitting into two. But I'm not too sure. It's pretty much go for yourself, isn't it? Make what you can. I don't think it goes as far as screwing over other people, but I think I got the impression from Ayn Rand that she didn't give a shit about anybody except Ayn Rand. I don't know if that's, this is just from watching her being interviewed, by the way, and her own words and her mannerisms, her expressions, her body language, how she talks, and what she's kind of trying to sell. What I call a snake oil salesman. Noodles, behave. Sorry, that's my dog going a bit nuts there, folks. Thanks, Keith. I guess it was another story. Bioshock Rapture is like Ayn Rand's views of the world. Bioshock's it's probably a game I should have got round to playing at some point. She did hate Reagan, funnily enough. I'm trying to think what the guy's name is. Bear with me, folks. All watched. No, it's not the poem, it's the teeth. Let me see. Adam Curtis. All watched over by Machines of Loving Grace. It's a 3-part documentary. Probably available on BBC iPlayer. If you haven't seen it, it's really interesting. But I'd say Ayn Rand and her ideals and how it affects corporate America. There's a link between the 3 documentaries, but that would be the main topic, I think, of the first one. That's kind of my introduction to her. But I've become aware of her, and especially the number of Americans called Rand. And I think even The Wheel of Time, as I was watching the other night, I caught a character called Rand in it. Excuse me. Ayn Rand would only debate with other reasonable people. Well, so she had to determine if you were reasonable first, I suppose. Since objectivism is the only rational worldview, she wouldn't debate with anyone who didn't accept her worldview. Yeah, it's a bit inflexible, isn't it? Well, if you watch that documentary, Keith, I don't know if you've seen it, you may get a different impression. Adam, I think Curtis has got quite a good handle on her. It's the way I don't think he's not. It's the way he assembles the material and puts it together, I think. I'd say that they're really good. You could look at those documentaries in terms of science fiction, try to punch a hole in that airtight logic. Well, that's the thing, I suppose. It's well, I suppose when I engage with people, it depends on how you're talking, but there's always a way of approaching to create a third viewpoint. If you've got within 2 out of 2, you'll get 3. It's I suppose, what is it? It's circular logic always wins. Well, no, we can reduce it to an absurdity, I suppose. Circular logic just gets you trapped, I think. But yeah, I'm trying to think what was. But as you're right, you see, there's some people, I suppose, that it's locked into the idea that my worldview is the only correct one. We know people like that. And I'm actually not going to argue this point. I think you can't. There are some people you can't argue with, but there's always a way. There's never just 2 points of view, I suppose. I'm just trying to get my brain right on this one. But if you take the dialectic argument, then regardless of what your point of view is, there's an argument for and an argument against, thesis and antithesis. But regardless of what you do, if you pick and choose from both, you can create a third argument. based on the two initial points of view, which is synthesis. So it's why the world is never black and white, because you can get grey, if you see what I mean. And it's why every coin has at least three sides. But yeah, again, oh god, but we had a thing with our local MLA. He's a real scumbag, Ryan, and all he did was just talk the same bollocks over and over and over again in a circle. Going into his office, it was a bit Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I have to say. Yeah, it's interesting. Reagan always, you're saying she did hate Reagan, funnily enough. Was that just because that she could see that Reagan was mad? I don't know. Ryan says, when I write technocracy, I can't help but to always think of wizards. And so just catching up on the comments, guys, and Ayn Rand would only debate with other reasonable people. Since objectivism is the only rational worldview, she wouldn't debate with anyone who didn't accept her worldview. Try to punch a hole in that airtight logic. I'm trying to think. The interview that I watched with her, Keith, it was quite. I don't know. I suppose it's probably the lighting and maybe the studio, the blackness around her. She came across as being a rather, I don't know, scary looking woman. I don't know. There was something quite harsh about her, I think. But very much Adam Curtis, I think, if I remember correctly, the documentary seemed to come. The gist of it seemed to come with her, something to do with her sex life. I think that she was. If you watch it, I think you'll see what I mean. But it's been a wee while since I've saw it. Catholics, Unionists, Nationalists, and Terrorists. Keith, is that what you're describing to me there? If we add on the state, then yeah, we call them cunts. I think the word you're looking for is cunt, says Keith. Yeah, that's an acronym to me, Keith. It describes most of the population of Northern Ireland. The technocracy is a faction of mages in the world of darkness. Oh, was that to do with excuse me, was that to do with I don't know, the Wheel of Time? I thought it was quite well filmed and all of that stuff, but each time I looked at it, getting certain plot points, I just went, "Oh, that's in Lord of the Rings. That's in Lord of the Rings. That's in Lord of the Rings. This is in Lord of the Rings. Hey, this is just like Lord of the Rings." And I have to say, it was one of the things that put me off fantasy novels for a long time. I think they were either that derivative of either the Lord of the Rings. They're all trying to be the new Lord of the Rings by trying to copy it, or else the regurgitation of mythological stories. Some people do it better than others, I suppose. If you look at the Michael Moorcock, the Eternal Champions, most of those are cultural myths that he's blagged from here, there, and anywhere. And he just updates them. There was an awful lot of books. I remember for a time you were getting kind of a lot of versions of Robin Hood, science fiction, Robin Hood in the future, this kind of thing, and I really couldn't fathom why. Epic fantasy can still be good despite the tropes. I agree. It's whenever if you're going to run with tropes, they're you could argue that even they're almost stereotypes within the fiction. And a lot of fantasy has X, Y, and Z amount of tropes. It's what kind of identifies fantasy fiction, I suppose. It's the hard. I think it's hard for fantasy writers to get out of established. How would I put it? I suppose fictional creatures, or that kind of thing. But if it's humans, elves, dwarves, etc., I just tend to think we're just reading a dungeon. It's either a version of Lord of the Rings or reading a kind of Dungeons and Dragons type book, But it's originality that's within, and for example, you could take Song of Ice and Fire, and you could argue it's really well written. It's got good characterization, blah blah blah. But you can, it's not original. I've taken other people's stories, regurgitated them, repackaged them, and written arguably better than it's and I think there's a lot of this that goes on, that there's kind of low quality, kind of not low quality, but sort of lesser known pulp works that actually have got some very good ideas in them, and they tend to pinch that and rewrite it a bit, and it has been going on in science fiction for quite, I think in fiction generally, Brian Sanderson is still solid, says Grimdark. Um, I don't know Brandon Sanderson. Have I read anything by them? Let me just check. I got author. Goodness. Why did Aaron Welsh come up? White Sand, Brian Sanderson. Let me see. What have we got? This is the chap that's finished Robert Jordan's high fantasy series. I was just reading a bit. I was just reading a bit of the blurb about the Wheel of Time because I wasn't familiar with it. Cosmere fictional universe. Which let me see, Misthorn. Bibliography. There we go. Romance. Oh, he's a modern writer. Hang on. Maybe he's not looked at the wrong thing there. Hang on. 2005. Yeah. Final Empire, Hero, Waybreaker, Way of Kings. Nothing that I would recognize, I think there. But that's what I was talking about, guys. It'd be a very modern writer for me, and that's kind of why I'm not too familiar with a lot of very modern science fiction writers. Excuse me. I suppose up until the death of Ian Banks, I would have considered him, Alistair Reynolds, etc. The two most kind of contemporary writers that I'll be reading, I suppose. Tried a couple of recent. I've read a China Miéville book, not if I'm pronouncing the gentleman's name correctly, recently, which I really enjoyed. It was called The City in the City, and I wanted to read one of his books. Somebody recommended him, but one of them was like that thick, and I went, not a good, so I kind of picked one of his other books at random, and I thought it was really interesting. It's been made into a short mini TV series by the BBC. I'd recommend it actually. But Anne Leckie's books were, the Imperial Raj trilogy, the Ancillary Justice books are very good. And if you like the kind of Ian Banks kind of type culture, they're kind of not that far off from it. Saying that, I read one of her recent books and had to put it down halfway through, really because I couldn't stop laughing. And this is a terrible thing, actually. I must tell you why. Does anybody know the Imperial Raj books, the Ancillary Justice, Ancillary Sword, and Ancillary Mercy? Is that correct? Mercy? Yeah, they're called. They're really good, I have to say. And in the books, I suppose gender is played around with a bit. And the main thing is that I think almost everybody's referred to by a female pronoun, which works in the story. And it's interesting because there are ships, there are people, there are males, and there are females. So it actually is one of those where this works quite well, and it's very intelligent, what you would call hard science fiction. It's got good character, all the things that we want. Really good 3 set of books, very satisfactory, damn well written. Loved it, and loved the premise of working with that pronoun. It worked well. The new book that she's done has brought in. It's in the same universe, but has brought in a planet. I think, and they have the issues that there are pronouns on this planet, and the real issues with the pronouns makes the book hilarious because they're meant to be, I suppose, it's supposed to be an attempt to be kind of using science fiction to look at the current gender pronoun issue, but the pronouns all sound like they're spoken by Yorkshiremen, and particularly if you know, for example, the goodies. In this country, there's a very famous comedy sketch that a guy actually died laughing at. It's about this Yorkshire martial art called Icky Thump, and anyway, the pronouns in the new Anne Leckie book all sound like they're hey up, buddy. And every time I read them, I know that they're meant to be pronouns, but they just sound like a Yorkshireman talking. And I can't. And at one point in the middle of the book, she actually has somebody come in from the world of the rats that uses the single and goes, "What's all this mad stuff about pronouns here?" And at that point, I thought you're actually taking the piss out of your own story, and popped it down. It's the first time I haven't finished a book in ages. I've put my bookmark and I promised to finish it, but it was making me giggle so bad. I remember the name of it. Oh, where are we? Sorry, just catching up. Grimdark says, as long as you give me a good prose and interesting characters, I'm satisfied. I can remember the name, but it's something with sword, literally a rewrite of Lord of the Rings, Sword of Shannara, I believe. Oh, the first three of those when they came out, and I don't mean any prequels and stuff, were quite good, but that's another example, Grimdark, of a series that just went on forever and ever, and abandoned it long, long time ago. Sanderson is the wheel of time, isn't he? Says Ryan. Yeah, I think he's the chap that finished it off. I think, Ryan. I'm still familiar with classic sci-fi and fantasy authors, despite being on the younger side. Says the Grimdark. Uh, Ryan said, "Yes, right, Grimdark." Keith Cobb, I have to take off. Have a pleasant evening, morning, afternoon, everyone. See you later, Keith. All the best. And Grimdark said, "See you, Keith." Yeah, it's getting a wee bit late here, folks. I'll just wrap up, I suppose. But it was a nice chat, and I have to say, it's interesting to hear some of the different books and things that you're talking about. I suppose we've all got sci-fi. I suppose a lot of films. To me, we never even got into anime too much, and Northern Ireland sort of Japanese anime arriving here in our video shops was a happy days event, I suppose, as a young person. Um, but yeah, we'll maybe have a wee bit more on that. I think science fiction is what we're all about here, and we'll have to keep it an open topic. But in the meantime, folks, I'm going to wrap things up. I will say that we'll absolutely definitely have our uh, Pelipids video ready for next week, and we'll have a wee chat after that as well. So in the meantime, all of you look after yourselves wherever you are. Take care and be safe. Thank you very much for joining me, and all the very best. Thanks now, and good night, guys. Take care. Good night, guys.